You've seen this moment before. You're talking, slowly, carefully. You even change the example halfway through. The other person nods, smiles, says, "Yeah, I get it." And then, 30 seconds later, they respond in a way that proves they understood nothing. Not misunderstood. Missed it entirely. You feel it in your body first, a small drop in energy, a quiet tension behind the eyes. You wonder if you explained it badly, so you try again. Simpler this time, shorter sentences, familiar comparisons. It still doesn't land. Here's the uncomfortable part most people avoid. The problem wasn't clarity, the problem was capacity. You've probably noticed it elsewhere too. Someone keeps making the same obvious mistake. Same outcome. Same damage. Clear evidence in front of them. And still they choose what feels right instead of what works, again and again and again. At some point you ask yourself a dangerous question. How is this even possible? Most people rush to a comforting answer: ignorance, bad education, lack of information. If only they knew more, read more, tried harder. That answer feels kind. It's also wrong. Schopenhauer watched this pattern for decades, not from a distance, but up close. Conversations, arguments, social rituals. He noticed something most people don't want to see. The majority aren't failing to think. They simply aren't thinking at all. They believe, they repeat, they align. Reason doesn't move them. Authority does, tone does, group approval does. You can show logic, structure, cause, and effect, and it passes through them like air through a screen. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. It should, because it hits close to home. Think about how often you've assumed others operate with the same mental tools you do. How often you expected understanding where only recognition was possible. How many times you felt frustrated, disappointed, even betrayed by conversations that were never equipped to succeed. Here's the shift Schopenhauer offers, and it's not a belief. It's an experiment. Lower the assumption, not the standard. Stop treating every interaction as a meeting of equals in reasoning. Start treating it as terrain. Different ground, different rules. Some people navigate with maps, others follow footprints. This isn't about superiority, it's about accuracy. There's a clean line here. Thinking versus repeating. Understanding versus agreement. Freedom versus comfort. Most choose comfort, not because they're evil, because comfort costs less. It asks nothing. It doesn't threaten identity. Once you see this, something strange happens. The frustration fades. Not because people improve, but because your expectations stop lying to you. You stop spending energy trying to wake someone who isn't asleep, just unequipped. And here's the practical value most miss. When you recognize limits early, you conserve force. You choose silence over explanation, distance over debate, strategy over emotion. But there's another layer to this that matters even more, and it's where people usually turn away. Because the same rule applies inward. How often do you think you're reasoning when you're really just defending a position you absorbed? How often does authority speak through you without you noticing? Schopenhauer didn't offer comfort. He offered clarity, and clarity is sharp. It cuts illusions first. If intelligence is rarer than you were taught, then discernment becomes a survival skill. Not everyone is meant to be convinced. Not every conversation is meant to continue. Not every truth is meant to be shared. Once you internalize that, the world stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling legible. But this raises a harder question, one most people never ask themselves. If thinking is rare, how do you know when you're actually doing it? That's where everything interesting begins. You've seen this pattern in real time. You lay out a clean line of logic. Step 1, step 2, cause, effect. They don't answer it. They throw back a slogan. something familiar, something safe. You bring evidence, numbers, examples, a concrete case. They answer with a feeling or with what everyone knows. The conversation moves, but nothing advances. And at some point, quietly, you feel it. This isn't a debate. It's a loop. That moment lands closer than we like to admit. Because part of you still expects the exchange to turn. For the other person to pause, to examine, to follow the thread. When it doesn't happen, the irritation creeps in. Maybe even doubt. Did I miss something? Am I explaining this wrong? Here's the risky thought most people refuse to hold. What if the issue isn't resistance, but limitation? Schopenhauer noticed something unsettling long before modern psychology dressed it up. When you deal with people who cannot think abstractly, you are not exchanging ideas. You are watching someone protect beliefs they didn't choose and have never inspected. So try a small experiment, not a belief, a test. In your next conversation, stop expecting thought. Expect repetition, expect reflex, expect preloaded responses. Watch what happens to your frustration level. There's a clean split here. Reason versus comfort. Inquiry versus identity. Most people choose identity. It's cheaper. It costs nothing to repeat what feels familiar. Thinking, real thinking, threatens the structure holding them together. You were taught something else. That intelligence is common, that most people are roughly reasonable if you give them time, patience, the right explanation. It's a soothing story. It keeps social life polite. It also sets you up for constant disappointment. Watch how decisions are actually made. Not in theory, in motion. People don't analyze. They react. They don't investigate. They align. They don't argue to find truth. They argue to defend a side. This isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. Real intelligence, the ability to hold abstractions, follow logic without emotional reward, admit error without collapse, is rare, uncomfortably rare. When you see it, it stands out immediately, like silence in a loud room. And here's where strategy replaces frustration. If intelligence is the exception, not the rule, then your energy becomes valuable. You stop spending it everywhere. You reserve it, you aim it. You choose when to speak and when to let the loop run without you. Schopenhauer warned that a man can do what he wills, but he cannot choose what he wills. Most people are moved by forces they never see and could not name if asked. Expecting them to reason their way out of that is like expecting gravity to negotiate. This shift saves years of explaining, years of arguing, years of trying to wake people who aren't asleep, just automated. But there's a sharper edge to this insight, and it's the part most people skip. Because once you accept that some people cannot understand you, not won't, but cannot, a new question appears. How do you recognize the rare ones who can? And more dangerously, how do you make sure you're not mistaking your own programming for thought? That's where the real work begins. You've been in this situation. You slow down your explanation. You switch examples. You simplify the words. It still doesn't land. Not because you rushed, not because you skipped a step, but because you're talking about calculus to someone still counting on their fingers. You feel the gap immediately. The silence after you speak. The response that slides past the point. You tell yourself to try again, clearer this time, kinder, more patient. And again, nothing connects. Here's the uncomfortable truth hiding in that moment. Some gaps don't close. They aren't made of misunderstanding. They're made of limits. Schopenhauer saw this clearly, and the clarity is strangely relieving. When someone doesn't understand you, it isn't always a failure on your side. Sometimes you've reached the edge of what their mental structure can hold. Try this as an experiment, not a belief. Next time the exchange stalls, Stop adding effort. Stop building the bridge. Step back and observe. Notice how the gap doesn't shrink, no matter how carefully you speak. There's a hard divide here. Capacity versus effort, reality versus hope. The intelligent move isn't persistence, it's calibration. You give people what they can actually receive, no more, no less. And then you move on without resentment. You've probably noticed something else that feels backward. The least capable voices are often the loudest, the most certain. They don't hesitate, they don't pause, they don't doubt. Their confidence is sharp, even aggressive. That confidence feels convincing until you look closer. Doubt requires imagination. It requires the ability to hold another angle in mind, to picture being wrong. Without that capacity, certainty is automatic. So when you bring facts, they don't bend. When you point out errors, they don't slow down. When you corner the logic, they don't retreat. They press harder. This isn't strength. It's insulation. Long before psychology named it, Schopenhauer understood the pattern. Incompetence protects itself with certainty. Reason can't enter because there's no opening. Here's where strategy replaces exhaustion. You stop engaging with aggressive ignorance, not out of arrogance, out of efficiency. You don't argue with a wall, you walk around it. Watch how most opinions are formed. Not in books, in life. People feel first. Then they search for reasons that support the feeling. Fear decides the stance. Anger sharpens it. Insecurity defends it. Logic arrives last as decoration. Seeing this changes how you move. You stop trying to win arguments that can't be won. You save your clarity for places where it can grow instead of bounce back at you. But this insight opens a more dangerous door. If confidence can be built on emptiness, how do you tell the difference between real understanding and loud certainty? And more importantly, how do you make sure you're not confusing your own confidence for depth? That's where the real test begins. You've watched it happen. A comment lands, a tone shifts, the room tightens, the feeling arrives first. Only then does the explanation show up, stitched together after the fact. You answer with logic, clean, direct. They don't respond to the logic. They defend the feeling. Nothing moves. That moment hits closer than we admit, because part of you still expects logic to matter. You still believe the right argument, delivered calmly, should work. When it doesn't, something inside resists accepting why. Here's the uncomfortable truth, hiding in plain sight. Most positions aren't built by thinking. They're built by emotion, then protected by reasoning that sounds smart enough to pass. So try a quiet experiment. Next time you argue, stop mid-sentence. Ask yourself what you're really pushing against. An idea? Or a feeling that hasn't shifted 1 inch? There's a sharp divide here. Logic versus emotion, truth versus comfort. You can't reason someone out of a place they never reasoned themselves into. And once you see that, the argument loses its grip. You realize you're not debating thoughts, you're pressing on feelings, and feelings don't answer to logic. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He understood that the person who lacks depth can't detect its absence. Recognition of limits requires the very capacity that's missing. So when you speak beyond their range, it sounds like noise. Your clarity sounds like confusion. Your nuance sounds like excess. You've heard the line before. If you really understood it, you could explain it simply. It feels clever. It isn't. Sometimes complexity can't be compressed without breaking. Sometimes simplification erases what matters most. Sometimes the failure isn't in the message, but in the receiver. That realization stings because it forces another admission. You've been seeking confirmation from people who cannot give an accurate verdict. This is where a different kind of relief appears. You stop needing validation from those who lack the tools to evaluate what you're offering. Their confusion stops being a signal. Their approval stops being a goal. Up to now, this understanding acts like armor. It protects you from endless arguments, from the drain of explaining in circles. But that's only the surface layer. Because Schopenhauer didn't stop at defense. He went further. He asked a more dangerous question. If most reasoning is emotional and most intelligence is limited, how do you move through this world without shrinking, without isolating yourself, without becoming bitter? How do you act strategically in an environment shaped by comfort rather than truth? That's where this stops being about avoidance and starts becoming something else entirely. Watch this happen in real time. Take a person alone, calm, reasonable, capable of nuance. Now place that same person inside a crowd, a meeting, a rally, a comment section where everyone agrees. Something shifts. Their voice flattens, their thinking shrinks. The sharp edges disappear. You've felt it too. You walk into a room with a clear thought. You leave repeating a phrase you didn't invent. That should bother you. Schopenhauer noticed this long before microphones and algorithms made it obvious. Put people together and intelligence doesn't add up. It dissolves. Groups don't reward thinking. They reward belonging. They don't respond to logic. They respond to emotion, to rhythm, to shared signals. Try a simple experiment. The next time you hear a crowd chant, pause. Listen for meaning. Notice how complexity vanishes, how disagreement becomes danger, how certainty replaces understanding. There's a blunt divide here. Truth versus belonging. Thinking versus comfort. In groups, nuance dies first. Slogans survive. Questions feel hostile. Independent thought becomes a liability. The crowd doesn't want to know what's true. It wants to feel aligned. Schopenhauer saw that humanity at scale becomes less than the sum of its parts. Limitation spreads easily, and intelligence doesn't. You don't catch depth by proximity, but you do catch simplification. This is why expecting rational discourse from a group is a quiet mistake. The intelligent person adjusts. They don't argue with crowds. They don't explain to mobs. They speak one mind at a time, or not at all. Here's where it gets sharper. Resistance to truth isn't passive. It's active. Most people don't reject truth because it's false. They reject it because it's inconvenient. Truth demands change. It asks for responsibility. It forces admission of error. Comfort asks for nothing. So people reach for phrases that feel warm and cost nothing. Everything happens for a reason. It'll work out. What's meant to be will be. They sound harmless. They aren't. They anesthetize. And anesthesia beats truth almost every time. Schopenhauer understood that truth aversion is normal. People don't want reality. They want relief. And when you offer truth to someone who wants comfort, you don't get thanks. You get resistance. Sometimes resentment. This is where strategy replaces hope. You stop handing honesty to people who didn't ask for it. You stop debating those who only want reassurance. You save clarity for the rare few who value it enough to endure it. Up to now, this might feel like withdrawal, like retreat. It isn't. It's precision. Because here's the part most people never see coming. Once you understand how crowds think, how comfort overrides truth, how limitation spreads, you gain leverage. Not over people, but over situations. And that changes how you move through the world entirely. But what actually happens when you ignore this rule and engage anyway? What does debate with limited thinking really produce? That's the next layer. You've done this before. You slow your speech. You borrow their words. You adopt their frame. You trim the edges of your point so it sounds familiar enough to be accepted. The longer it goes, the more you compress. Nuance turns into slogans. Substance turns into something light, easy, harmless. And at some point you feel it, they didn't rise to meet you, you step down. They That realization stings because it's personal. You weren't trying to win, you were trying to connect. But connection came at a price. Your clarity. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people won't say out loud. Some conversations don't fail because you explained badly. They succeed at the wrong thing. So try a different experiment. Next time you feel yourself simplifying past the point of honesty, stop. Notice what you're trading away. Ask what the interaction is really costing you. There's a clean split here. Clarity versus approval. Preservation versus persuasion. Schopenhauer treated intelligence like a finite resource, not something to show off, something to protect. He understood that certain arguments aren't worth entering because the toll isn't time. It's your own precision. People don't change their minds because of evidence. You've seen this. Facts bounce off. Examples slide away. What actually changes is identity, and identity doesn't shift quietly. To ask someone to abandon a core belief is to ask them to dismantle part of who they are. To admit they were wrong? To admit the structure they stood on was unstable. For most people, that's unbearable. So they don't engage. They defend, they harden. This isn't stubbornness, it's self-preservation. Schopenhauer saw that people are largely what they are, not what they could be with the right argument, the right article, the right explanation. Their range is set. Their view of the world feels complete because it fills their field of vision. Here's where the practical insight cuts deep. You stop trying to upgrade minds. Think about it honestly. Have you ever raised someone's fundamental capacity to think? Not taught a skill, not shared information, actually expanded their ability for abstraction, for doubt, for intellectual honesty? You haven't. No one has. Because capacity has limits. And most people are already operating near theirs. Once you accept that, something shifts. You stop exhausting yourself trying to pull people past a ceiling they can't cross. You work with what's there. Or you disengage entirely. This isn't cold, it's efficient. And here's the part that matters most. When you stop trying to change minds, you free up energy for something else. Something quieter, something more effective. But that raises a harder question. If persuasion is mostly a dead end, what does influence actually look like? That's where the real strategy begins. Watch people closely for a week. Not in theory, in motion, at work, at dinner, online. Notice how the same triggers produce the same replies. Same jokes, same defenses, same opinions, recycled with new dates. You've noticed this before, even if you didn't name it. Conversations feel familiar before they finish. You can predict the response halfway through your sentence. And when it happens, right on cue, something in you tightens. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people aren't choosing in the way they think they are. Schopenhauer was blunt about this. He saw behavior not as a series of decisions, but as execution, script running, conditioning firing, biology nudging, culture filling in the blanks, people move, speak, react, and only afterward call it choice. Try a small experiment. The next time someone reacts instantly, watch how fast the justification appears. Not reflection, not pause. Just a reason ready-made, as if it was waiting. There's a clean divide here. Autopilot versus awareness, freedom versus comfort. Most people live on default settings. Same beliefs, same emotional roots. They don't vary because variation requires thought, and thought requires effort most never train. Schopenhauer understood why arguing rarely works. You're not addressing a deliberating mind. You're interrupting a program, and programs don't listen. They resume. The intelligent move isn't frustration, it's adjustment. You stop expecting conscious reasoning from those who don't even know their behavior is scripted. You treat limits as facts, not challenges. And then there's the part no one likes to admit. As clarity increases, compatibility drops. You've felt this too. Most conversations drain you, not because you dislike people, but because you're constantly translating, compressing, simplifying. The pace is wrong. The depth never arrives. If intelligence follows a normal curve, this isn't personal, it's math. If you think in the top few percent, most people cannot meet you there. Not won't. Cannot. Schopenhauer chose solitude over constant reduction. Not isolation from bitterness, but distance from exhaustion. His philosophy doesn't promise connection everywhere. It removes the expectation that it should exist. There's another sharp truth here. The clearer you see, the fewer people can see with you. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means alignment is rare. And forcing it costs more than it gives. So the intelligent person stops pushing for connection where capacity isn't there. They stop mistaking incompatibility for rejection. They conserve energy. They choose their environments carefully. This isn't loneliness, it's accuracy. And once you accept that intelligence creates distance, a deeper question opens. If most people are on autopilot, what does it actually take to step off it yourself? That's where everything important still waits. Watch what happens when you say something others didn't even know existed. Not louder, not aggressive, just precise. The room shifts, eyes narrow. Someone laughs it off. Another labels it overthinking. The reaction isn't curiosity, it's discomfort. You felt that moment, that quiet pushback, not against your idea, but against what it implies. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Seeing what others can't see makes you a mirror, and many people hate mirrors. Schopenhauer noticed this pattern clearly. When you hit targets no one else even recognizes, it exposes a gap. Not in effort, in perception. And that gap breeds resentment, so they attack the source. They call you pretentious, arrogant, too clever for your own good, anything to break the reflection. Try this as an experiment. The next time hostility appears out of nowhere, don't defend, observe. Ask what your presence just revealed. There's a sharp divide here. Visibility versus safety, clarity versus comfort. This is why Schopenhauer's strategy isn't exhibition. It's discretion. You don't broadcast intelligence to those who can't process it. Not out of shame, out of efficiency. You stay fully clear with the few who can meet you there and deliberately simple with everyone else. Up to now, this understanding protects you. It reduces friction, it saves energy, but that's only the surface layer. Here's where it turns into leverage. Most people exhaust themselves trying to reason with the unreasonable. They argue, explain, repeat. They're shocked when the outcome never changes. You stop being shocked. When you accept that critical thinking is rare, behavior becomes predictable. You see patterns before they unfold. You know which emotions will override logic. You know confidence will beat competence. Comfort will beat truth. Belonging will beat accuracy. And predictability is power. While others react, you position. While others argue, you anticipate. While others run on autopilot, you stay awake. This isn't manipulation, it's alignment with reality. Think about every figure who actually shaped outcomes, not opinions. They didn't try to convince everyone. They moved quietly, chose moments, spoke to the few, let the majority follow without understanding why. And once you see this dynamic, you can't unsee it. The real question isn't whether this works. It's whether you're ready to stop playing the same exhausting game everyone else is playing. Because once you step out of it, something else becomes possible. Watch how influence actually moves. Not in speeches, not in debates, in quiet rooms, inside conversations, in who people look at before they decide what to think. You've seen it. One person speaks with certainty. Others nod. Not because they check the logic, but because the signal feels safe, familiar, approved. Here's the uncomfortable part. The majority doesn't decide by reasoning, they decide by alignment. Schopenhauer understood this early. You don't need to convince everyone. You never did. You only need to stand in the right place inside the structure they already follow. Try this as an experiment. Stop arguing with crowds. Stop correcting everyone. Instead, notice who actually listens, who pauses, who asks a second question instead of defending the first reaction. There's a sharp divide here. Reach versus leverage. Effort versus positioning. Most people follow authority, confidence, and tribe. Not truth, not depth. Once you accept that, something releases. You stop fighting the current and start steering within it. The intelligent person doesn't battle the majority. They bypass it. They build quiet alignment with the few who can think. They speak simply to those who need emotion and symbols. They reserve depth for those who can carry it without dropping it. From the outside, it looks effortless. From the inside, it's precise. This isn't manipulation, it's efficiency. It's choosing not to bleed energy on people who are never going to change. It's recognizing that frustration comes from demanding reality behave differently than it does. You have two paths here. One is familiar. Expect people to rise, explain more, push harder, feel disappointed again. The other is quieter. Accept limits, adjust your approach. Start moving forward. One path exhausts you, the other works. This philosophy isn't surrender. It's a different way of winning. Not by convincing everyone, but by understanding how outcomes actually form. Here's the truth that settles everything. Most people are intellectually limited. This isn't temporary. It isn't fixable. It won't improve with time or better arguments. Once you stop trying to change that, something unexpected happens. You gain freedom from irritation, from false hope, from endless explanation. You stop waiting for understanding. You stop demanding thought where comfort rules. You see limits clearly and treat them like terrain, not enemies. And when you move like that, without anger, without contempt, just clarity, progress becomes possible again. Schopenhauer spent his life watching human nature without illusion. The real question now is simple. Will you keep fighting what won't change, or finally start navigating with your eyes open? Watch what happens when you stop arguing with the world. Not dramatically, just quietly. You notice how much tension drops the moment you no longer expect people to surprise you with depth they've never shown before. That moment hits close. Because part of you was still hoping, still pushing, still waiting for understanding that never arrived. I.e., here's the uncomfortable truth. Peace didn't come from changing humanity, it came from stopping the fight with what humanity is. Schopenhauer reached it the hard way. By watching, by paying attention to patterns instead of excuses. He didn't ask how people should think, he looked at how they actually do. Try a small experiment. For the next few interactions, give people exactly what they can receive, no more, no less. Notice how much energy you stop losing. There's a clear divide here. Precision versus struggle, acceptance versus frustration. Most suffering comes from miscalibration, expecting intelligence where there is habit, expecting reflection where there is impulse, expecting depth where there is comfort. When you stop doing that, something shifts. You conserve your sharpness, you stop spending it everywhere like loose change. You deploy it deliberately, quietly, only where it can land. Depth becomes selective, clarity becomes guarded, engagement becomes intentional. This doesn't mean withdrawal from the world. It means moving through it without resistance. You stop trying to fix what cannot be fixed. You stop hoping people will become who they've shown they won't be. Most people are limited. Most people cannot think critically. Most people will never fully understand you. Say it without heat, without bitterness, just as fact. This acceptance isn't surrender. It's leverage. The moment you stop demanding more from people than they can give, disappointment loses its grip. You stop wasting force on arguments that never had an endpoint. You begin working with reality instead of against it, with people as they are, not as potential projects, with the world as it functions, not as you wish it would, and something unexpected happens. You feel lighter, clearer, more effective. This isn't cynicism. Cynicism is emotional. This is precision. It's seeing without illusion, acting without resentment, choosing without apology. Schopenhauer didn't find peace by softening reality. He found it by looking straight at it. Now you can do the same. And once you do, the question changes. Not how to fix others, but how far you can go when you finally stop fighting what won't change. That's where the real freedom begins.